Hey, you all, Farmer Jesse here. I hope you have been enjoying the new season of the No-Till Market Garden podcast. I know that I have. Again, save for this episode right here, I guess, I am not in the hosting seat this season, but rather I am playing more of a producer role here in season 5, and I have been having a great time doing so. But just like we did the last couple of weeks, we wanted to take some time and introduce our new hosts. And so I'm excited to introduce our third host of season 5, the amazing Natalie Lounsbury. I really wanted to bring in a little more of the science from someone who really understands it, and Natalie herself is a researcher and has done a lot of work with cover crops. That's kind of her thing. You may remember her for the Priming for Production podcast series she did on soil organic matter, which was one of my favorite things I've ever listened to. And in this mini interview that I do with Natalie, she and I discuss a little bit of her background, and I learn that I may owe diakon radishes an apology. Yep. Natalie's first interview will be up on Monday, officially kicking off her awesome contributions to season 5. As always, though, of course, we have some awesome sponsors this year. Our work is primarily powered by the good folks over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. So if you appreciate this or anything else that we do, consider signing up to be a patron at patreon.com/no-till-growers. You can likewise support our work by picking up a copy of the Living Soil Handbook from no-till-growers.com, where the proceeds go to making you more stuff like this. Oh, and the no-till hats are back. Pick one up at no-till-growers.com. Otherwise, please subscribe to this podcast wherever you're getting it. And while we wait for Natalie's first interview, please enjoy this mini interview I did with Natalie Lounsbury, the third of our amazing new hosts of the No-Till Market Garden podcast. Natalie Lounsbury, welcome to the hosting seat. I am so excited to have you join the team.
Yeah, I'm excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, and thank you for coming on. So for a little background, you did a really nerdy series on soil organic matter. That is absolutely like one of my favorite things ever on the Priming for Production podcast. And that's ultimately how I learned about your work. Can you tell us a little bit about that project and how it came about?
Yeah, I'm so happy that you liked it, and it is definitely nerdy. So I did my master's in soil science at the University of Maryland, and I was there in what was kind of this like almost a paradigm shift in how we understand soil organic matter. And so for those of us in the soil world, it was like, holy cow, this is really exciting, and I wanted a way to share this information with farmers. And so this was 2000, I guess I had already done my master's, and so it was like 2015, and the Serial podcast had just like exploded the podcast world. And I was like, this is the way to go. Podcasts are the future. Edutainment is the future. And like, I don't want to write a fact sheet for people. People don't want to read fact sheets. I want to do a podcast. And so I pitched this as a grant proposal to SARE, and they said yes. And so I just went and interviewed folks and talked to them about what is soil organic matter, where does it come from, what has changed in our understanding of soil organic matter. And yeah, at the end of the day, it was funny because I had folks who were sort of advising me on this, and there were people who were like, you can't make episodes that are 40 minutes long. No one's ever going to listen to those. You need to make things that are 5 minutes. Like, farmers need short little tidbits of information. And I said, no, I totally disagree. I think people really want like in-depth information. They want to know what's going on. And so I sort of held my ground, and I said, nope, I'm going to do this like long series on soil organic matter. And so I did it. And so it's really great to hear that you enjoyed it and got something out of it.
Oh, I'm so glad you went with a lot. Like, our biggest complaint that we've generally like consistently get is that the episodes are not long enough. And our episodes are like an hour and 15 minutes, sometimes an hour and a half.
Yeah.
Because farmers are, sitting on tractors or, harvesting lettuce for an hour and they need something long to listen to. So that's great. I'm very thankful that you went with it.
Yeah. And another thing that people said too was like farmers, they want you to just like tell them what to do. And I said, I really disagree. Like, I really think people want to understand how things work. And so I'm not going to tell people what to do. I'm going to like get into how this works and then they can figure out what to do.
I know I didn't prime you for this, but I think it would be really interesting because some people probably don't realize there was this huge shift in the paradigm shift in thinking about how soil organic matter works.
Yeah.
Would you be able to possibly give us like the sort of general rundown of like what happened and maybe like where that stands today?
Yeah, and like I do have a podcast, so I would encourage people to go back and listen. But the basic idea is that people back is starting in like the 1600s, we're trying to figure out what is this brown stuff that appears in the soil. And so this guy like extracted it using this very basic like lye almost and brought out this like brown icky goo and called it like humic substances. And so from then on, everybody thought this material in soil was this humic substances. And the reason that's relevant is because for a long time, people thought that chemical structure of this material was so complex that it had taken thousands of years to form. And therefore, if we went and, tilled the soil and we oxidized this organic matter, that you couldn't build it back because it had taken thousands of years to build up that like very particular sort of recalcitrant, or so they thought, recalcitrant humic substances or humic materials. And it turns out that really isn't true. Like there may be a few people out there who argue, oh no, it really is, but the majority of the soil science world now recognizes that's not true. There aren't these complex humic substances that took a very long time to form. Instead, it's just all these like plant and microbial byproducts that when they stay in the soil for a long time, it's because of where they're located in the soil, not so much because of their chemical structure. And so the really exciting thing about that is that it means that we can build back organic matter much faster than we thought in the past. Like in the past, people would say, okay, if you want to rebuild your organic matter, you've got to add like a ton of compost, because compost is this humified substances. But we know now that you don't need to do that. You just need to get the carbon into the soil. You can do that in different ways. It doesn't have to be compost. It can be through plant roots. In fact, plant roots are the best way to get carbon back into your soil. Maybe not the fastest. Adding a ton of compost is going to increase your organic matter very fast, but it's an external input. So it's a really exciting turn of events because it means that all of our depleted soils, maybe there's more opportunity to build back that organic matter than we thought in the past.
Now, did you grow up farming? Like, what's your sort of relationship or what got you into soil and agriculture?
Yeah, I did not grow up farming. I grew up in Maine, and when I was in college, I decided I need to take some time and figure out what I'm doing. And so I took a year off and I did an apprenticeship at an organic farm in Maine. And I discovered that I really enjoyed farming. And so then after college, I went back to that farm and I managed it for 2 years. And I really enjoyed like the physical act of farming. I have to be totally honest. I did not love the customer service part. I'm a pretty introverted person, and I don't know. I'm in awe of people who do farmers markets and CSAs and all that. I think it's really fantastic. It's not my personality, And I was drawn to research because I also recognize like there's a lot that we're not succeeding in organic farming. Like there's a lot of erosion that I'm observing, and there's like this intense weed pressure. And this is back in like 2002 was when I did my apprenticeship, so 20 years ago. And there was actually very little talk in New England anyway, very, very little talk about no-till at all, which is kind of shocking to think about now because everybody's talking about it now. And so I wanted to go back to school to kind of study how can we reduce tillage and protect our soils better, but without herbicides. And so I went to the University of Maryland and I studied forage radish as a cover crop, so like diakon basically. And so not for like a continuous no-till system, but for kind of a rotational no-till system where you plant forage radish in the fall and then you no-till spring vegetables the following spring. So that's what I did for my master's. Then I had always thought, so there's this guy who works for Maine Organic Farmers and Gardeners Association, Eric Seidman, and he was like known as the nation's first like organic extension agent. And I always thought I want to be Eric Seidman. But then I realized, you know what, I actually really love research and I just want to keep doing this. And so I decided to continue and get my PhD. I came to the University of New Hampshire to be closer to home. And I ended up doing my dissertation on using cover crops and tarp for small-scale organic rotational no-till. So I did rye and vetch terminated with tarp and to grow organic vegetables. And so that's what I did. And I was actually not really intending to do that for my dissertation work, but I sort of saw an opportunity that growers were really interested in it. So I applied for a grant and I got a grant to do that from SARE and ended up doing that for a few years. And we actually put together a tarping guide for the Northeast that your listeners might be interested in. You can get that through the University of Maine Cooperative Extension. I did that with some colleagues from University of Maine and Cornell. So that's kind of how I got into agriculture from a very, and I also forgot to mention that I worked as an organic crop inspector as well. And so being an organic crop inspector just gave me the opportunity to see what was happening on a lot of different farms and kind of identify what were the struggles that people were facing, just see more farm.
I'd never thought about the value of being a crop inspector because our inspectors asked me once if I wanted to do it, and I said no because I'm not good at paperwork. I wouldn't be good at it. But seeing a lot of farms would be really interesting. That's kind of a cool aspect of it.
Yeah, it was definitely cool. It is mostly paperwork. Like you go and you just see, does their organic systems plan line up with what they're doing, and you're not even, you're not allowed to give any advice or anything. So it's sort of a weird conversation. It's like, okay, just you show up and show me everything you're doing. And in a state like Maine where I was doing it, there's a long history of organic farming, and I would say most people doing it are doing it because they really believe in organic farming. They don't want to use synthetic chemicals, and so there's a philosophical reason that they're doing it. And so I never felt like I was, looking for like, oh, looks like they used herbicides over there, or I'm looking for the bag of such and such that they're hiding in the corner. But I do think that in other parts of the country and other parts of the world, sometimes being an organic inspector is like you're kind of looking for what people might be doing on the fly. I don't know if you should include that, but Yeah,
I would love to include that. That's
it's
so
a funny
interesting.
job.
Yeah. No, I think that is really interesting. I can tell when, I mean, not so much. Inspectors are pretty straightforward when they come to our farm, but I think it's probably, they're not thinking they're going to get a gotcha on my farm because clearly, like, I dedicate everything to soil health and those sorts of things and would never use any chemicals. So it's not as big of a deal, but I didn't think about, like, yeah, in some places it probably, especially with things like the hemp, the uptick in hemp, where you get a lot of people who are just conventional growers who suddenly flipped over to organic. They probably, there was probably more of things, even just accidentally using things they didn't know they weren't allowed to.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's probably more. There's probably more to that, but I think that's fascinating. Can I ask you a question about daikons?
Yes, go ahead.
Okay. Because I've seen some of the research and it doesn't seem to be super clear, but the assumption with daikons is they're really good at breaking up compaction. True or false?
Yeah.
Yes?
Yeah. And so the interesting thing about daikon compaction is it's a very different mechanism. Like, if you think about steel in the field and like pulling a subsoiler, you're trying to like lift all that soil and you're trying to kind of break up an entire layer. And what a daikon does is it just creates these little root channels, and we call it biodrilling. And so it drills through that compacted soil layer and creates this little root channel. If you went out with a penetrometer, you might not notice any differences because you might not hit that root hole. But the subsequent crops, those roots can find those root channels. And so it doesn't really matter what a penetrometer sees. It matters what the next crop sees. And the next crop can find these areas where the radish has already biodrilled. And so it's really easy for that next crop root to get through the soil.
So I guess the logical follow-up to that would be, is it better than other crops at decompaction, other cover crops?
Yeah, it is. So the other crops in that same family, so like canola also does a very good job, but radish is probably the best. And so radish has that really big taproot, and so it's not like a crop like winter rye has kind of the fibrous roots, and so for the surface soil, that'll really like loosen things up. But if you're really looking to get through like a compacted subsoil layer, then the forage radish is the best.
Very cool. Okay. Last thing I want to just mention before we end this and get to your first interview. You're kind of working on a project at the moment, and maybe some of the interviews that we have coming in this winter could be assisting in that. Can you talk a little bit about that project that you're working on?
Yeah. So my current project is looking at cover crops. And cover crops are really my passion, in case you can't tell. And how can manipulate cover crops to be more effective at putting carbon into the soil. And so one of the things I mentioned earlier was that roots are very efficient at putting carbon in the soil, but I'm asking questions about, if we plant our cover crops more densely, does that actually send more root carbon into the soil? Like, do the plants start allocating more biomass to their roots if we plant them more densely? And then the other question that I'm asking is about the how we manage cover crops and whether that affects the microbial carbon use efficiency. And so what that is that when you put carbon into the soil, microbes basically eat it and digest it, and then they respire a percentage of that. It's just like we respire. So when we eat, we respire, and then we breathe, we respire carbon dioxide. So these microbes are also respiring carbon dioxide. And so how much of the carbon that we put into the soil gets respired versus how much ends up as microbial biomass or microbial byproduct is the carbon use efficiency. And so if microbes are more efficient at taking carbon and keeping it in the soil and actually respiring less, then that means that more of the carbon that we put into the system stays in the system. And so how much carbon is in your soil is a function of how much goes in, or your inputs, and how much goes out, your outputs, very, very simply. And so the microbial carbon use efficiency is sort of a rate. It's like it regulates that. And so my current project is, and I don't have any results yet, but is looking at if we manipulate the species and sort of the quality of those inputs, like grasses and legumes, does that affect the microbial carbon use efficiency?
That is fascinating. Well, Natalie, especially now, I'm super excited to hear all of your interviews this year, and I just want to thank you so much for embarking on this project with us. I'm just so excited.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it. Hopefully, I didn't say anything that doesn't that doesn't add up. I will get subsequent interviewees who will clarify it.
Okay, great. Perfect. That's what it's all about.
Thanks, Jesse.
All right. Thanks, Natalie. All right. I hope you enjoyed that episode, and we will be back here on Monday, bright and early, for Natalie's first interview. So make sure you are subscribed to this podcast wherever you are getting it, so that comes up in your feed. Also, while I have you, we just started a new forum over at no-tillgrowers.com. And if you're like, Jesse, seriously, a forum, this is not 2003. Well, here's the idea. We want to really remake the idea of a forum. When forums were big, we didn't really have the technology that we have today to really flesh them out with videos and photos. So with that in mind, our forum not only has those options, but soon we will have forum exclusive content with videos and photos to help guide you through everything from starting a garden to microscopy. Plus, this forum is populated by professional growers like myself, like my partner no-tillgrowers.com, Jackson Roulette, like others in the No-Till Growers family and beyond, who are able to answer your questions, like genuinely answer them. Go there to discuss, masterclass options or tools, or look for employment or employees, or ask crop or soil specific questions. Like everything that we do, it's free. So I hope to see you over there. Link is in the show notes. Otherwise, what do you say we just meet back here on Monday for Natalie's first episode? Cool? Cool. See you then.